Nurse Mara Ellison was kneeling beside the dead soldiers. When the colonel stepped into the military hospital, and the dog finally made a sound. For 3 days after Sergeant Caleb Rannes' funeral, Atlas had refused food, water, touch, and command. Lying beside and untouched, 10 Colonel Everett Voss arrived with polished medals, a folded transfer order, and a smile that made every wounded soldier in Ward 7 go still. Atlas rose without barking. He moved between the colonel and Mara, teeth hidden, body trembling, one paw planted over Caleb's old dog tag. Mara saw the tag was not clean anymore. Something had been scratched into the metal after the burial, and the question nobody dared ask was simple. What did the dog know about the man? Everyone was saluting. Before this story unfolds, tell us where you're watching from tonight. Leave your country name in the comments, especially if you believe dogs. Remember what people try to bury. And subscribe to Silent Valor, cool for stories of courage, loyalty, sacrifice, hidden heroes, and the quiet justice brave dogs carry home. The bowl had not moved in 3 days. It sat inside the recovery kennel, a Fort Astor military hospital, a stainless steel circle filled with softened meat, rice, and broth. Exactly the way Sergeant Caleb Rain used to prepare it. After hard missions, the kitchen staff had warmed it twice. The kennel tech had added bone marrow. The duty veterinarian had checked for infection, pain response, dehydration, depression. Every possible reason had been written down on a clipboard except the one everyone was afraid to say aloud. Atlas was waiting for a man who would never come back. He lay with his massive head between his paws, a Belgian Malinois with sable fur, dulled by dust and sleeplessness. His ribs moved slowly. His ears did not lift when boots passed. He ignored the squeak of wheels, the hiss of oxygen tanks, the distant cries of men waking from anesthesia. The hospital had seen grief in many forms. Mothers who refused chairs, soldiers who stared at missing limbs, nurses who washed blood from their wrists long after the blood was gone. But Atlas' grief was different. It was disciplined, silent, like a command he had been ordered to hold. Nurse Mara Ellison watched him through the kennel glass before her shift began. She still wore her blue surgical cap, though her hair had escaped beneath it in tired brown strands. There were shadows under her eyes no amount of cold water could hide. On her left hand, between thumb and forefinger, a thick white scar pulled the skin tight. She usually kept that hand inside her pocket when new patients came in. Some scars invited questions. Others reopened rooms no one else could see. Still, nothing asked Major Evelyn Price. Mara turned. The hospital commander stood behind her in a charcoal uniform, silver hair pin tied, the kind of posture that made even exhausted orderlies straighten instinctively. She was not cruel, but she had learned to speak softly only when the situation was grave. Not a bite. Mara said. Vet says if he doesn't drink by tonight, we intervene. Mara, he'll fight the tube. He'll die without it, he knows. Major Price said nothing for a moment. She had been at Caleb Rannes' funeral. Everyone at Fort Astor had. The young sergeant's casket had been closed because the blast had not left enough mercy for ceremony. His medals were pinned to a folded display near the flag. His mother had touched the wood only once, then stepped back as if the coffin had burned her. Atlas had sat beside the grave in his service vest, not lean, not whined, not barked, sat. When the rifle salute cracked the morning open, 3 recovering infantrymen had flinched hard enough to need help standing. Atlas had not moved. When the bugle played taps, his ears had angled toward the sound, but his gaze stayed fixed on the casket. When the honor guard tried to learn, Chiron had became stone. Mara had been the one to crouch beside him. At last, she had whispered, "Come on, boy." He turned his head then. Only then. And for 1 second, she had not seen a trained war dog. She had seen a creature with no language left for the thing humans had done. Now, 3 days later, he had brought that silence back into the hospital with him. Major Price folded her arms. "Mara, you're assigned to Ward 7, not to recovery. I know. You've been here before shift, after shift, during meal breaks. You're going to collapse. Here, trust me." The major studied her. "Does he?" Mara did not answer weakly. Trust was too clean a word for what lay between her and Atlas. He had known her before Fort Astor, before the clean ward floors and clipboards, before she was. He had known her in a collapsed A station outside Marja Ridge, when mortar smoke turned noon into midnight, and men called for medics who could not reach them. Back then, Atlas had been Caleb's dog. Caleb had been the handler who laughed too loudly, wrote letters on waterproof paper, and pretended not to be afraid whenever he was most terrified. He had called Atlas ear when the dog ignored him. He had given Mara half a protein bar the day her hands shook too badly to open her own pack. And on the worst night of Mara's life, Atlas had dragged her by the sleeve out of a burning field clinic after she refused to abandon a wounded private. She had never told the whole story. The Army's official report had not asked for the whole story. Some truths, she had learned, were treated like infections. Cut away the visible part, bandage the wound, pretend the fever was unrelated. A clang showed from inside the kennel. Mara looked up. Atlas had moved, not toward the food, not toward the water, toward the folded blanket in the corner. His nose pressed under the edge, his paw scraped once, slow and deliberate. "Atlas," Mara said. Major Price stepped closer to the glass. The dog hooked something beneath the blanket and pulled it into view. Metal flashed. Mara's heart slammed once. A dog tag. Caleb's dog tag. It was attached to a broken chain, the same one placed over the frame photograph after the funeral. Mara had seen it at the memorial table. Caleb's mother had touched it before leaving. The tag should have been locked in the family effects box, not inside a recovery kennel beneath a hospital blanket. Atlas placed one paw over it. Then he looked directly at Mara. Major Price, voice hardened. "How did he get that?" Mara opened the kennel door. Atlas did not rise. He did not growl. He simply watched as she approached, his dark eyes clearer than they had been in 3 days. She knelt slowly, palm visible, her scar pulled tight. "Easy," she whispered. Atlas lifted his paw. Mara picked up the tag. It was cold, damp from his breath, and heavier than memory should have been. Caleb Renes's name, blood type, and service number were stamped deep into the metal, but along the bottom edge, where the steel had been smooth before, fresh scratches cut across the surface. Not random bite marks, letters. Mara brought it closer. COBALT. Her skin went numb. Behind her, Major Price asked, "What is cobalt?" Mara could not answer, because the last time she had heard that word, it had come through a dying radio buried under rubble, followed by a colonel's voice ordering their position abandoned. Before Mara could speak, a commotion rose beyond the kennel room. Boots, hurried voices, someone saying, "Make way, sir." Major Price turned through the glass wall, down the corridor lined with flags and war signs. A tall officer entered the coup recovery wing. Colonel Everett Voss, His uniform was immaculate. His medals were arranged with almost theatrical precision. He carried a brown leather folder under one arm and walked as if the building belonged to him. Two aides trailed behind, but he did not look at them. He looked directly into the kennel room, at Mara, then at Atlas. The dog stood, slowly, no bark, no lunge, just a silent rise from grief into warning. Mara felt the tag cutting into her palm as Atlas stepped in front of her, body angled toward the colonel, eyes locked on the man everyone in the hallway had begun to salute. And for the first time since the funeral, Atlas showed his teeth. Colonel Everett Voss had the kind of face newspapers like. Square jaw, calm eyes, gray at the temples, a scar near his chin that looked heroic if you did not know how often men collected scars doing things they hoped no one remembered. He had given speeches after base funerals. He had appeared beside grieving families, one hand over his heart, voice lowered to a register that sounded almost holy. Mara had seen him twice before in person. The first time had been years earlier, across a smoky landing zone, when he stepped from a helicopter after the fighting was already over and asked for survivable numbers, not names, not faces, numbers. The second time had been at Caleb's funeral, standing behind the honor guard, his hat pressed against his chest, his expression carrying exactly the right weight for cameras. Now he stood outside the kennel room, while Atlas bellowed Mara, as if the colonel carried a weapon. Major Price opened the door halfway. Colonel Voss, Major. He nodded once, then looked past her. He was told the dog was failing. He has refused. His eyes moved to Mara's hand. Nurse Allison, is that evidence or personal property? Mara realized she was still gripping the dog tag. Major Price noticed too. Colonel, we just recovered Sergeant Rayna's tag from the kennel. It appears to have been altered. Atlas's growl began. Solo Mara felt it in the floor before she heard it. The aide's behaves sharpened. Major Price, control that animal. He is controlled, Mara said before she could stop herself. The colonel looked at her as if she were a stain on a clean sleeve. Nurse, I did not address you. The words landed louder than they should have. Ward 7 was close enough that patients in open doorways had begun to watch. One man with a bandaged shoulder stopped mid-step. Another, Corporal Noah Bell, sat in his wheelchair near the nurse's station, pale face turned toward the kennel wing. Noah had lost part of his right leg below the knee and most of his easy faith in officers. He had been Caleb Rayna's last living patient from the convoy blast. Mara saw him from the corner of her eye. Noah shook his head once, almost invisible, a warning. Voss extended his hand. The tag, Major Price hesitated. Mara handed it to her commander, not to Voss. Price read the scratches. Her expression changed by only a fraction, but Mara knew that fraction. It was the moment a commander realized paperwork had failed to contain reality. Voss' hand paused. Only Mara seemed to notice. The colonel recovered quickly. Probably handler coat. Dogs become attached to sounds. Grief behaviors can look intelligent to people who want meaning. Atlas took one step forward. Mara touched the dog's vest lightly. Hold. The word should not have worked. She was not his handler. He had no obligation to obey her. But he stopped. Voss saw it. His eyes narrowed. You've been working with him, he asked. I've been sitting with him. That dog is settled for transfer. Major Price turned Transfer. Voss opened the leather folder and removed a document. To you the temporary reassignment to the Tactical Canine Evaluation Center. Given Sergeant Rain's death and the dog's unstable condition, Command believes specialized review is appropriate. Command did not notify me. Price said, "EM notifying you. This hospital is still treating him. He is military property." The words hit the hallway like a slap. Noah Bell's wheelchair creaked. Mara's throat tightened. She had heard that phrase before too. Military property. As if loyalty could be inventoried. As if grief could be signed over. Alice's ears flattened. Voss held the paper out. Major, ICE authorization by 1700. The colonel looked at Mara again. And Nurse Ellison should be reassigned away from the animal immediately. Attachment clouds judgment. Mara almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the cruelty was so clean. Men like Voss always called compassion a problem when it got close to truth. Major Price said, "I assign my nurses, and I remove security risks." Voss's voice stayed polite. Nurse Ellison was attached to Marja Rich Casualty Operations. Was she not? The corridor seemed to lose air. Mara's fingers went cold. No one in Ward 7 knew the full file. They knew she had served as a combat medic before becoming a base hospital nurse. They knew she did not attend memorial videos. They knew she sometimes woke in the supply closet with her hands braced against shelves. But they did not know Marja Rich. They did not know Cobalt. Major Price's eyes cut toward Mara, not accusing but alert. Voss continued, "Given her history with Sergeant Rain, the dog, and that incident, it would be inappropriate for her to handle related materials. A tragic friendly fire confusion, already investigated. Atlas bars. It was not loud like an attack bark. It was sharp, cracked, almost pained. Every wounded man in Ward 7 flinched. Mara looked down. Atlas had turned away from Voss and pushed his nose against the lower pocket of Caleb's old service vest hanging on the kennel hook. The vest had been cleaned before the funeral, or someone claimed it had. Its patches were worn almost smooth. Alice's unit, a faded medical cross. Caleb had soon on as a joke because Alice kept finding wounded men before medics did. The doc notched the pocket again. Mara opened it. Empty. Atlas paused harder. Not at the pocket, at the seam beneath it. Mara fell on the stitching. Something stiff pressed under the fabric, hidden between layers. Her heartbeat began to climb. Voss stepped into the kennel room. Atlas zoomed around instantly. This time his growl filled the glass. The aides reached for their radios. Major Price raised a hand. Nobody move. Mara did not breathe. The colonel had stopped less than 6 feet from her. Atlas stood between them, shoulders lifted, teeth visible, every muscle vibrating. But he did not attack. He did not lose control. He guarded. Voss' calm mask thinned. For 1 second, Mara saw something beneath it. Fear. Not fear of being bitten. Fear of being recognized. Mara, Nora, Noah called from the hallway. Everyone turned. The wounded soldier had rolled closer, face gray, one hand gripping the wheel of his chair. His voice shook with pain or terror. Might be both. Don gave him the vest. Noah said, "Caleb told me if anything happened, Atlas would bring it to the medic with the scar." Mara stared at him. Noah's eyes dropped to her left hand, then to Voss. The colonel's jaw tightened. Atlas pressed back against Mara's knees, holding the line. And beneath Caleb Rana's vest pocket, hidden under wartime stitching, something small and rectangular waited to be cut free. Major Price ordered the kennel wing seal, not dramatically, not with raised voice or sirens. She simply turned to the nearest military police officer and said, "No one enters or exits until I say otherwise." And the tone of her command changed the entire building. Colonel Voss smiled like a man amused by an inconvenience. "Major, you are overreacting." "I hope so," Price said. "Overreaction leaves better paperwork than negligence." The colonel's eyes cooled. Mara remained kneeling beside Atlas. Caleb vest spread across her lap, the hidden object beneath the seam pressed against the fabric like a second pulse. Her hands wanted to tremble, so she forced them to move slowly. Nurses learned that early. Panic could scream inside you, but the hands must remain useful. Noah Bell sat just outside the kennel door, refusing to return to his bed. Sweat gathered at his temple. His stump dressing was fresh. He should have been lying down with his leg elevated. But when an orderly approached, Noah cursed quietly and told him he would move when the dead got a vote. Major Price allowed him to stay. Voss did not like that. "This is absurd," the colonel said. Grieving MPD, a traumatized nurse, and a DAR, not an investigative body. Atlas had snapped toward him. Mara whispered, "Easy." The DAR obeyed. Major Price crouched near Mara. "Can you open the seam without damaging what's inside?" "Yes, do it." Mara reached into her scrub pocket for trauma shears. The metal handles fit her hand with old familiarity. She slipped one blade beneath the thread and began cutting. Each tiny snap sounded too loud. The first layer opened, then the second. A small packet slid into her palm. It was wrapped in black waterproof tape, flattened from years under fabric. Across the tape, in faded marker, someone had written 2 words, "For Scar." Mara's breath left her. Noah covered his mouth. Voss stepped forward. "That is classified material." Major Price stood. "You don't know what it is." "I know where it came from." The room went silent. Voss realized his mistake. A heartbeat too late. Bryce's eyes narrowed. "Do you?" The colonel's expression hardened. "Anything recovered from Marja Ridge falls under seal operational review. Then you won't mind if we document chain of custody?" "I mind very much when unqualified." Voss looked at her. For years, Mara had imagined what she would say if she ever stood this close to one of the voices from that night. She had imagined anger, accusation, maybe even courage. Instead, all she felt was the old heat, the field clinic burning, a radio screaming under debris, Caleb's voice calling, "Medic, move!" Atlas clamping his teeth in her sleeve, and another voice, calm through static, Probol 6 to all units. Negative extraction, site compromised. No survivors confirmed. No survivors confirmed. Wow, Mara was still alive. While Calebran had been crawling through smoke with half his face blackened, refusing to leave her, Mara peeled the tape back. Inside was a plastic evidence sleeve, yellowed but intact. It held a small memory card and a folded strip of waterproof paper. On the paper, Caleb's handwriting was cramped and uneven. Major Price paused before taking it. She read aloud only the first line. Atlas brings these 2. Mara. Voss came back. The room went utterly still. Voss' face changed. Not much, just enough. The polished grief vanished. The public man disappeared. In his place stood someone older, uglier, and far more dangerous. Major Price lowered the paper. "Colonel." Voss spoke softly. "Major Price, I am ordering you to surrender that packet." "No." The word seemed to surprise even her. The ache behind Voss shifted again. One looked toward the military police at the door. Uncertain which authority outweighed which, Voss' voice sharpened. You are interfering with a classified matter, and you are named in potential evidence hidden by a dead soldier. A dead soldier who suffered blast trauma and emotional instability. Atlas lunged one half step. Mara caught his vest. Hold this time. Holding him cost strength. She felt it through the nylon. The dog's body a contained explosion. Noah's voice rose from the doorway. Caleb wasn't unstable. Voss did not look at him. Corporal Bell, return to your ward. No, you are under my command. No, sir. No, swallow Harry. Mara saw Noah shrink into himself, then fight his way back out. The young soldier's knuckles widened on the wheelchair rims. I heard the radio, Noah sighed. Caleb told me not to repeat it until at last found the right person. Voss stared at him with almost pitying contempt. You were in shock? I was bleeding, not deaf. Major Price moved between them. Enough. We're reading the rest in my office with legal present. Nah, Voss said. One word. Bear. Command stripped to bone. Atlas barked again. From Ward 7, more soldiers appeared. Men on crutches, men with IV poles, a veteran missing 2 fingers, a young private with burns out of his neck. They gathered in the corridor not because they understood, but because wounded men recognize when one of their own is being cornered. Mara stood, the memory card now inside Major Price's gloved hand. Voss's gaze moved from the card to Mara. You don't want this open, he said. Mara's mouth went dry. You think truth heals? He continued. You of all people should know it does not. Truth will not bring Caleb back. It will not restore Corporal Bell's leg. It will not remove your name from the ridge. Her scar throbbed. Major Price said, What does that mean? Voss smiled faintly. Ask her how many patients she left behind. Mara flinched, as if struck. Atlas felt it. The dog turned from Voss and pressed his shoulder against her leg, grounding her before the room could tilt. Noah's voice cracked. She didn't leave us. She stayed too long. Voss glanced at him. Children remember heroes because they need them. No, Noah. Sad dogs remember truth because they don't. The hallway fell quiet again. Atlas lowered his head and sniffed the air. Then, unexpectedly, he moved past Mara, not toward Voss, toward the colonel's leather folder lying on the chair where he had placed it. Voss reacted instantly. Stop him, but Atlas had already reached it. He did not tear it apart. He did not tear it like an animal out of control. He hooked one claw under the folder flap and dragged out the transfer order. A second document slipped loose beneath it. Mara saw the heading, QRS Behavioral Termination Recommendation. Her stomach turned. Major Price picked it up. Voss' face became stone. The transfer had never been about evaluation. It had been about making sure Atlas never showed anyone what Caleb had hidden. And as Major Price read the termination order, Atlas walked back to Mara and placed himself between her and the colonel again, as if he knew the danger had finally stopped pretending. They moved to Major Price's conference room because glass walls had become a liability. The military police formed a line outside. Ward 7 buzzed like a hive after lightning. Nurses whispered over med cars. Patients traded pieces of what they had seen, each retelling growing sharper but not less true. A dead handler's tag, a hidden packet, a colonel name in a note. A dog that would not eat because grief had not been the only thing lodged in his throat. Mara sat at the end of the conference table with Atlas pressed against her chair. She had not asked for him to be allowed in. Major Price simply looked at the dog, looked at Mara, and said, "He stays." Colonel Voss stood rather than sat. Men like him did not like chairs unless they controlled the room from them. His aides were gone now, dismissed into the hallway. Only Voss, Price, Mara, Nara, and Atlas remained, along with the base legal officer on speakerphone waiting for the memory card to be inserted into an encrypted reader. Noah's wheelchair was positioned beside Mara. He looked smaller under the fluorescent lights, his hospital gown tied badly at the neck, one blanket over his lap. Pain had drained the color from his mouth, but he refused medication until he had spoken. Major Price set Kayla's folded paper on the table. "Mara, before we open this, I need to know what cobalt mean." Mara stared at the word scratched into the dog tag. Cobalt. For years, it had been less a word than a locked room inside her head. Cobalt was the command call sign during Marja Rich casualty evacuation. She said, "We were running a forward medical point after a route clearance team hit pressure place. Multiple casualties. Communications broken. Smoke everywhere." Caleb and Atlas brought in wounded from the outer road. Noah's eyes were fixed on the table. Mara continued. Each sentence dragged over old glass. "We requested extraction. First request were inbound. Then command changed. A voice using Kobo 6 ordered on mobile units to withdraw. Said the A station was overrun. Said no survivors were confirmed." Major Price looked from Mara to Voss. Via answered immediately. "Operational call signs. Rotate." I supervised regional movement, but was not basically at every position. That is not an answer. That is the only answer permitted. Mara's hand tightened under the table. Atlas placed his paw on her shoe. She inhaled. "There were survivors," she said. "Noah, 3 others. Caleb, me." Atlas kept finding men under debris. "We marked them with cham lice." Caleb kept saying command had bad information. Then we heard the order again. "Negative extraction. Site compromised. No survivors confirmed." Noah whispered. I screamed into the radio. Mara closed her eyes. She remembered a boy's voice, raw and terrified. No one had. Major Price's voice was careful. "How did you get out?" Mara looked at Atlas. "He dragged me first." Noah turned toward her, startled. Mara had never told him that part. Might be because guilt is selfish. It convinces you that your survival is proof of betrayal, even when you had no choice. I was trying to clamp Private Dorsey's bleed. Mara see. The ceiling came down. I thought if I let go, I'd die. Atlas grabbed my sleeve and pulled. I fought him. I hit him. I think he still pulled. Caleb came back through the smoke and carried Dorsey out himself. The last thing I remember before the secondary blast was Caleb yelling at me to run. Her scar burned. Afterward, a report said confusion during withdrawal caused delays. It said Caleb died in the blast before extraction could be attempted. It said I lost consciousness early and could not provide reliable sequence. Voss spoke quietly, because that was true. Mara looked at him. No, it was convenient. Atlas lifted his head. The legal officer's voice crackled from the speaker. "Major, the reader is ready. Insert the card." Price slid the memory card into the device connected to the room monitor. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered. Static timestamp. Audio distortion. A low camera angle appeared, tilted, dust clogged. It took Mara a second to understand what she was seeing. Atlas's vast camera. The footage shook with his movement. Smoke blurred everything. Red jam lights glowed on the ground like scattered wound. Someone coughed. Someone prayed. The camera swung past Mara kneeling over a soldier, her face streaked black, blood on her cheek, and careless voice, breathless, Atlas, fine. The dog surged forward. The footage cut through smoke, past broken cots, past a dangling 5e bag. Noah appeared beneath a collapsed beam, younger, both legs intact, but one crushed under metal. His mouth opened in a scream the camera could not fully catch. Caleb shouted, "Medic, Bell's alive," Mara's voice answered from off-screen. "Mark him." The footage lurched. A radio crackled nearby. 10, a voice filled the conference room. Cobalt 6 to all units. Negative extraction. Site compromise. No survivors confirmed. Withdraw and sanitize route. Mara's throat closed. The room froze. Major Price. The screen now began to shake. Voss said nothing. The footage continued. Caleb grabbed the radio. His face appeared close to the camera. One eye swollen, blood running down his temple. "Cobble, this is Ray. We have survivors. Repeat, survivors at aid station." Static. Then the same voice, colder now. "Rena, you are ordered to cease transmission. That side is burned." Caleb stared into the smoke, as if looking at the man through it. "Colonel Voss, I have wounded kids here." Mara's eyes flew to Voss. The colonel did not move. On screen, the radio hissed. Then came the voice again. "Sergeant, you have your orders." Caleb whispered. "Atlas, record." The DAW's camera dipped as Caleb's hand pattered. They brought another sound, entered the recording. "Helicopter rotors. Not leaving. Arriving." Mara leaned forward, confused. The footage swung toward the outer road. Through smoke, a helicopter silhouette settled beyond the ridge. One figure moved ahead of the others, tall, wearing a colonel's insignia on his collar. Noah whispered, "Tass him," but Atlas growled under the conference table. Murray looked down. The dog was not watching the screen anymore. He was staring at Colonel Voss on the monitor. Caleb's camera caught the approaching officer's face for one clear second. Mara's mind rebelled. The man in the footage wore Voss rank, Voss unit patch, but the face was not Everett Voss. Major Price slowly turned toward the colonel standing in her conference room. "What?" she asked. "Are we looking at?" Voss's expression had gone pale beneath the practiced calm. Atlas rose, silent and rigid, and Mara understood with a coldness worse than fear. The dog had not been guarding her from a colonel. He had been guarding her from the wrong one. The footage stopped on the stranger's face. Major Price replayed the frame once, then again. "Enla, dear, Gunna, Teasier, Bard, Arouse, the Mao insignia, the old unit patch, half hidden by smoke." He was older by a decade, with a heavier jaw and a deep vertical crease between his brows. Mara did not know his name, but Caleb had, because in the video, as the man reached the A station perimeter, Caleb, "Colonel Arlen," Noah whispered. "Arlen," Voss said. "This is meaningless." No one listened. The footage resumed. Colonel Arlen, the real Cobalt 6, ran toward the without hesitation. Not with a camera-ready stride, not with polished command presence, with panic, fury, and purpose. "Who ordered withdrawal?" he shouted. Caleb pointed toward the radio. Came through as Cobalt. Arlen's face twisted. You didn't send it. The conference room seemed to tilt. Mara gripped the edge of the table. On screen, Arlen knelt beside Noah, ripped off his own belt, and helped Mara secure a tourniquet. His hands were bloody within seconds. He shouted coordinates to the helicopter crew. He ordered extraction reopened. He cursed. Everett Voss stepped back from the table. Major Price noticed. Stay where you are. I will not be detained by a base hospital commander. You will until legal tells me otherwise. Atlas moved with him, not lunging, not barking, matching each step. Voss stopped. The footage continued. Mara watched her younger self stagger through smoke carrying an IV bag high over one shoulder. Caleb Surda, K-hair by. He drops, drag her. Then the camera view spun wildly. A blast through everyone sideways. Sound disappeared into white distortion. When audio returned, Caleb was breathing hard. Colonel Allen lay near the radio, wounded. Blood spread beneath his ribs. Mara saw herself crawling toward him, but the camera shifted away as Atlas ran after Caleb. They reached a broken wall outside the clinic. Through the dust, another officer appeared near the radio relay truck. Younger Everett Voss. Not Colonel Fan, Lieutenant Colonel. Semi-eyes. He was holding a handset. Caleb shouted, You sent it. Voss turned. For the first time in the footage, the younger Voss looked afraid. Caleb moved toward him. He used Cobalt. Voss says something the camera barely caught. He preserved the operation. Caleb's voice became deadly quiet. You left them. Voss looked past him toward the burning ice station. The package was compromised. Arlen went off mission. There were wounded. There were witnesses. The word entered the conference room like poison. Colonel Voss' voice cut through the silence. That footage is incomplete. Price looked at him. It is clear enough. You have now authority to interpret battlefield context. Nah, she said. But I know a confession when I hear one. Voss's composure cracked. You think you understand sacrifice because you run a hospital. Every one of you sits in the clean aftermath, judging decision made when national security is collapsing in real time. Mara stood with her. What was the package? She asked. Voss looked at her. The thing worth more than wounded men. Mara said. More than Caleb, more than Arlen, more than the truth. For a long moment, Voss did not speak. Then his gaze shifted to Noah. You were a child, he said. You have no idea what almost happened that night. Noah's voice trembled. I know I was under a beam screaming for my mother, while someone on a radio said I didn't exist. Voss flinched, not from guilt, but from irritation at pain being made inconvenient. Major Price picked up Kayla's paper. There was more written beneath the first line. She read silently now, her face tightening with every sentence. Mara watched. What does it say? She asked. Price looked at Voss, then at Mara. It says Caleb believed Colonel Arlen survived long enough to file a sealed complaint. It says the complaint disappeared. It says Voss was promoted within 6 months. Voss laughed once, without humor. Our dead handler's paranoia. Price continued. Idea, it says Atlas had been trained on SEN discrimination for command personnel after a base infiltration incident. Caleb Rotas reacted differently to Allen and Voss even when both wore cobalt patches. Mara looked down at Atlas. The dog's ears were forward, his body as it had in a kennel. Silent proof, not words, not politics, recognition. Voss sighed. A dog cannot testify. No. Major Price replied. But recordings can. Transfer orders can. Termination recommendations can. And so can living witnesses. Living witnesses. For years, she had told herself she was unreliable because the report said so. Trauma, fragmented, smoke injured, concussed. She had let official language colonize her own memory. She had let men in clean offices convince her that guilt was evidence and silence was recovery. Atlas pressed his nose against her scare hand. Mara looked at the scar. She remembered now not just fire, but the moment after. Colonel Arlen's hand closing around hers as she tried to stop his bleeding. His blood had dried into that wound. He had pulled her close and whispered something she could not understand through the ringing in her ears. Maybe she had understood and buried it. Mara shut her eyes. "What did Erlen say to me?" she whispered. No one answered. Atlas suddenly turned toward the conference room door. A knock came. The military police opened it a crack, and a hospital aide stepped in, pale and nervous. "Major Price, I'm sorry. There's a Mrs. Wren at the front entrance. Sergeant Wren's mother. She says Colonel Voss called her and told her Atlas was being put down tonight." The room detonated into silence. Mara looked at Voss. His face gave away nothing now. Major Price's voice was ice. "You called a grieving mother." Voss adjusted his cuffs. "Families deserve closure." Atlas growled. Not low this time, clear. Mrs. Wren had buried her son 3 days ago. Now she had been summoned to witness the destruction of the only living creature who still carried his last command. Myra stepped toward the door. "Vosite, Nurse Allison, you are not going anywhere with that dog." Atlas moved in front of her before the sentence finished. Major Price looked at Mara, 10 at Noah, 10 at the frozen video frame where the real Colonel Arlen knelt among the wounded. "Bring Mrs. Wren to Ward 7, Price ordered, "and call for lockdown." Voss's eyes hardened. For the first time, Mara saw that he was no longer trying to win the room. He was calculating how to escape it. And Atlas knew it before any human did. Mrs. Helen Wren arrived wearing the same black dress from the funeral. Someone must have brought her too quickly for her to change. Or maybe grief had made clothing irrelevant. Her hair was pinned badly, silver strands loose around her face. In one hand she clutched a folded handkerchief. In the other, Caleb's memorial program, already creased until the paper looked soft as cloth. When she entered Ward 7, the wounded soldiers went quiet. No one ordered them to stand. Many could not, but every man who was able straightened. One lifted his bandaged hand, another bowed his head. Noah wheeled himself forward and whispered, "Ma'am." Mrs. Wren did not look at him first. She looked at Atlas. The dog stood beside Mara at the center of the ward. No leash, no command. His eyes fixed on Caleb's mother. For 3 days, he had refused food. For 3 days, he had not allowed anyone close enough to comfort him. But when Helen Wren took one step forward, Atlas lowered his head. A sound broke from her. Not a sob exactly. Something smaller and older. "Oh, wow, Atlas," she whispered. The dog walked to her. Mar felt everyone watching. Colonel Voss stood near the ward entrance under guard, his expression arranged into sympathy again. But the mask no longer fit. Major Price was beside him with 2 military police officers. Legal had advised holding him pending review, but rank still complicated handcuffs. Menai Voss lived in the gap between suspicion and authority. Atlas reached Mrs. Wren and pressed his head against her waist. She folded over him. Her hand shook as it touched his ears, his neck, the worn place where Caleb's fingers must have rested 1,000 times. "He told me you stopped eating," she said. They told me you wanted to go with him. Atlas stayed still. Mara's throat tightened. Mrs. Rain looked up at her. Are you Nurse Ellison? Yes, Mom. My son wrote about you. Mara froze. Voss, shifted by the door, had it. Helen nodded. Not wrote much about danger. He wrote about small things. Coffee, bad boots, Atlas, stealing socks. But once he wrote, if anything ever happens, find the medic with the scar. She stayed when staying cost something. Mara looked down, her scared hand curled. He didn't save him, she said. Mrs. Rana's face crumpled, but her voice stayed gentle. No, honey. I don't think any of us save everyone. No, I turned away, crying silently. Mara, a moment, then stepped forward. Messrs. Rain, I am sorry to ask this now, but did Sergeant Rain leave anything with you? Anything unusual? A letter, an object, instructions about an... Helen wiped her cheek. After the funeral, a man from the colonel's office collected Caleb's effects for review. He said there was a discrepancy. Voss sighed. Standard procedure. Mrs. Rand turned toward him. You told me his dog was suffering. He is. You told me Caleb would not want him used for politics, correct? She looked back at Atlas. But Caleb also told me Atlas only disobeyed when men lead. The word went completely still. Voss' jaw tightened. Mrs. Rain reached into her handbag. There was one thing they didn't collect. She pulled out a small cloth pouch. Atlas' ears lifted. Mara knew immediately that the dog recognized it. Helen's hands trembled as she untied the string. Caleb mailed this 2 weeks before he died. I thought it was just something sentimental. He wrote, keep this away from uniforms until the right person asks. I was angry at him for that. I thought uniforms were his brother's. From inside the pouch, she removed a patch. Faded blue, cobalt. The letters were worn, the edges burned. Voss's face drained of color. Major Price stepped closer. May I? Helen handed it over. Price turned it in her hands. On the back, under a loose strip of thread, something had been written black ink. Mara leaned in. Not words, Nama whispered. Marza Resh. Mara's pulse pounded. Major Price looked at Voss. Was at these coordinates. Voss, see nothing. Atlas suddenly moved. He sniffed the patch, then turned sharply and walked down Ward 7 as injured bodies could. Mara followed. So did Major Price. Helen ran Noah and the military police escorting Voss. Atlas moved with Voss searching randomly, but trotting randomly, built from scent and training. He passed medication carts, empty beds, a wall of unit photographs, then stopped at the far end of the ward beside a locked display case. Inside were recovered items from Fort Astor's history, cracked helmets, old radios, unit coins, a torn flag. From us stood beneath one object, a radio handset. Mara read the block, recovered from Marja Ridge Aid Station, donated by Colonel Everett Voss. Her body went cold. Tasks not possible, she said. Major Price said, why? Mara swallowed. The radio Caleb used in the footage was destroyed in the second blast. Atlas pawed the floor beneath the case. Once, twice. The hospital curator protested for approximately 3 seconds before seeing her face and unlocking it. Price removed the radio handset. Atlas sniffed it and recoiled, ears back, lips lifting. Mara saw something lodged inside the cracked battery compartment. Not a battery, a folded waterproof sheet. Price pulled it free carefully. Voss moved so fast one of the military police barely caught his arm. "Hat is classified," he snapped. Major Price looked at the sheet. Her face hardened in a way Mara had never seen. "What is it?" Mara asked. Price read aloud. "Field Casualty Amendment, submitted by Colonel Thomas Allen, Marja Rich, survivors confirmed of unauthorized withdrawal, false cobalt transmission, suspected. Recommend immediate investigation of Lieutenant Colonel Everett Voss for command, impersonation, evidence suppression, and attempted abandonment of wounded personnel." Helen Rain made a sound like her heart had torn. Noah gripped his wheelchair rims. Mara could not move. The official complaint had not disappeared. Caleb had hidden a copy where only Atlas memory would lead them. Voss stared at the paper, then at Atlas, and for one moment his hatred was naked. "He stupid animal," he whispered. Atlas stepped with him. "No," she said, voice shaking but clear. "He's the witness you forgot to bury." The soldiers of Ward 7 began to murmur, not loudly, just a low human sigh rising around the colonel. Major Price handed the amendment to the legal officer, who had arrived breathless at the ward entrance. "Enter this," she said. "Now." But before he could take it, the lights flickered once, twice. Then the emergency alarm sounded from the south exit. A security breach. Voss, smile, small, almost invisible. Alice spun toward the alarm before anyone else understood, and Mara realized the colonel had not come to take the dog alone. He had come prepared to erase everything. The south corridor filled with red light. Hospital alarms always sounded too much alike. Fire, breach, evacuation, oxygen failure. For half a second, every wounded man in Ward 7 heard his own worst memory. Inside, the noise. Then training took over. Nurses moved beds away from doors. Orderlies locked at wheels. Military police drew sidearms and shouted into radios. Major Price seized Voss by the arm. "What did you do?" Voss did not resist. That frightened Mara more than if he had fought. "I followed protocol," he said. Atlas barked the worst. The south exit. Mara knew that bark now. Not threat, direction. "He smells someone," she said. Price turned to the MPNPS. "Secure the colonel." But the moment one officer moved to restrain him fully, the war sprinkler system burst overhead. Cold water exploded from the ceiling. Patients shouted. Monitors sparked and died. The lights flickered again. Steam rose where water struck hot equipment. In the chaos, someone near the south exit yelled, "Smoke, not real fire," Mara realized. A diversion. The legal officer clutched the Arlen amendment to his chest, trying to shield it from water. Mrs. Rain stood frozen beside Atlas's empty bowl, soaked and shaking. Noah tried to wheel himself backward but slipped against the wet floor. Voss moved. He slammed his shoulder into the nearest MP, not to escape toward the exit, but toward the legal officer. Toward the paper. Atlas launched. Mara shouted, "Atlas, hold!" The dog hit Voss low, not biting flesh, but driving his body between the colonel and the evidence. Voss stumbled, crashed into a medication cart, and knocked stainless trays across the floor. He reached into his jacket. Mara saw the motion. Not a gun, a small black device. She did not think, she moved. Her body remembered field medicine faster than fear could argue. She grabbed Voss' wrist with her scarred left hand and twisted down. Pain shot through the old scar. The device fell, skidding across the wet tile. Noah's wheelchair blocked it. He leaned forward, grabbed it, and threw it under a bed. Voss struck Mara with his free arm. she fell hard. Atlas' growl became a roar. For one terrifying second, Mara thought Ras did not bite. He planted himself over Mara, chest heaving, teeth bared inches from Voss' hand, controlled. Exact Caleb's last training living inside him. Major Price and the MTS slammed Voss to the floor. The colonel laughed breathlessly, cheek pressed to the wet tile. You think this ends here? That paper is a copy. That nurse is compromised. That nurse is compromised. The dog is unstable. Mara pushed herself up, bloody mouth. Harris backed with her. Voss turned his head enough to meet her eyes. You'll all be buried. In review, the smoke thickened at the south corridor, but the military police had control now. Someone shouted that a maintenance panel had been rigged with a smoke charge and a remote trigger. The black device Noah had thrown away had likely activated it. A planned distraction, a chance to damage paper, destroy electronics, our abbot to remove Atlas's authority. But the evidence was still intact. Mostly, the legal officer held the amendment under his soaked uniform jacket. The memory card had been sealed in a waterproof bag. Caleb had known better than to trust dry rooms. Mara stood slowly. Her cheek throbbed, her hand screamed. But she walked to Voss. Atlas remained at her side. You said truth doesn't heal, she said. Voss looked up at her from the floor, still trying to appear above everyone, even with his face against tile. Mara continued, maybe not all at once, maybe not cleanly, but lies keep wounds open. Caleb knew that. Alan knew that. Atlas knew it every time you came near him. Voss' eyes flicked you the dog. There it was again, fear. Mara crushed, close enough that he could see the scar he had used against her. Colonel, Alan said something to me before he died, she said. I couldn't remember it because I thought the memory would kill me. But I remember now. Major Price turned. Noah looked up. Mrs. Wren covered her mouth. Mara's voice trembled. He said, Telun Kabal was stolen. The words seemed to stop breathing. Voss closed his eyes. Just once enough? Major Price heard the confession in the silence. The legal officer stepped forward. Colonel Everett Voss, pending formal command review. You are being detained under suspicion of evidence suppression, falsification of casualty reporting. Unauthorized command in but weaker now. You don't have authority. Major Price looks down at him. Maybe not enough to finish it. Enough to start. The MPS pulled him up as they led him through Ward 7. No one soldier, not one nurse, not one officer. Voss' wet uniform clung to him. His medals looked suddenly small, bright pieces of metal trying to pretend they had weight. He passed Mrs. Rain without looking at her. He passed Noah without looking at him. But when he passed Atlas, the dog sat perfectly still, not submissive, judgmental. Voss looked away first. The alarms finally stopped. Water dripped from ceiling panels. Patients shivered. Nurses moved again, checking lines, replacing blankets, calming men who had already lived through too many explosions. The ward looked ruined, but alive. Mara sat on the floor because her knees had decided without consulting her. Atlas came to her. In his mouth, he carried Caleb's dog tag. He placed it in her lap. The scratched word Cobalt caught the red emergency light. Mrs. Rain knelt beside them, heedless of the water soaking her dress. She touched the tag. Then, Atlas' face. Me boy, she whispered. You kept your promise. Atlas leaned into her hand. Then, for the first time since the funeral, his stomach was small, almost absurd. Noah left first. A broken disbelieving sound that turned into a sob. Mara laughed too, one hand over her bleeding lip, tears mixing with sprinkler water on her face. Major Price looked toward the untouched bowl, still sitting near the kennel cart that had been brought into the ward. "Get him food," she said. But Atlas did not move toward the bowl. Not yet. He looked at Mara, turned toward the old radio handset, now empty of its hidden truth. Then back to the dog tag in her lap. Mara understood. There was one promise left. Caleb had not hidden the truth so Atlas could simply survive. He had hidden it so someone would carry it all the way home. And tomorrow morning, in front of the entire base, Mara would have to speak the words she had spent years trying not to remember. The memorial hall was full before sunrise. News had not officially spread. It never needed to. Bases had their own bloodstream. By dawn, every barracks, ward, mess line, and motor pool knew that Colonel Voss had been removed from Fort Astor under guard, that Caleb Wren had left evidence inside his dog's vest, that the cow Atlas had stopped a termination order, and that Nurse Mara Ellison, the quiet one with the scarred hand, had been named in a dead colonel's final warning. Command wanted a closed hearing. Major Price refused. Not because all details could be public. Some names still belong behind sealed doors. Some operations carried consequences beyond one room. But she insisted on one thing. Caleb Wren's mother would not learn the truth through another sanitized report. Ward 7 would not be told again that their own eyes had misunderstood what they had seen. And Ellen's mom, well, Atlas. So they gathered in the memorial hall, under flags that had watched too many ceremonies pretend closure was possible. Mara stood near the front with Atlas. At her left knee, her face was bruised. Her left hand was wrapped. She had refused pain medication because she wanted every word clear. Noah sat in his wheelchair beside Mrs. Rain. Major Price stood at the podium, expression carved from exhaustion and resolve. On a table before them lay three objects: Caleb's dog tag, the burned coal patch, a printed copy of Colonel Arlen's casualty amendment. Alice had hidden at Beira, or at the Dudia, not each half the bowl. Then in water. 10 he had carried the empty bowl to Mara's feet, as if submitting evidence of his own. The kennel tech cried so hard, she had to leave the room. Now Atlas watched the hall. He did not wag. He did not seek attention. He stood like the last remaining guard of a mission finally ending. Major Price stepped to the microphone. 3 days ago, she began, we buried Sergeant Caleb Wren with honors. We believed we were honoring his whole service. We were not. A murmur moved through the hall. Newly recovered evidence indicates that Sergeant Wren preserved critical information related to Marja-rich casualty operations, including evidence that Colonel Tom Attow, an authorized withdrawal order, was transmitted under false authority. Mara heard someone inhale sharply behind her. Major Price continued, careful but unflinching. Had evidence, is now in formal custody. Colonel Everett Voss has been relieved of local authority pending investigation. No applause, no cheers. Truth did not enter like victory. It entered like surgery. Necessary, bloody, late. Major Price looked at Mara. Nurse Allison has agreed to provide witness testimony. She does so voluntarily. Mara stepped forward. The microphone waited. For years she had believed silence protected the dead from being used. She had believed if she spoke, Lawyers would dismantle memory piece by piece until Caleb became unstable, Alan became reckless, Noah became confused, and she became the broken medic who survived because others did not. But Alice leaned lightly against her leg, not pushing, reminding. Mara gripped the podium with her bandaged hand. "My name is Mara Allison," she said. "I was a combat medic at Marja Ridge." Her voice echoed too loudly. She forced herself to continue. "I was told for years that what I remembered was unreliable. Some of it was. Trauma breaks time. Smoke changes shapes. Pain adds sound. But not everything broken is false." Noah lowered his head. Mara looked at Caleb's mother. Sergeant Caleb Brannan Coatlas brought wounded soldiers into our aid station after the convoy blast. Caleb did not abandon his handler. Colonel Thomas Arlen came back when he learned the withdrawal order was false. He was wounded helping us extract survivors. Her throat tightened. Mara touched the scar on her left hand. "Before he died, Colonel Allen told me Cobalt was stolen. I did not understand then, or my bearer did, and I was too afraid to carry it. Atlas carried it. Corporal Noah Bell carried it. Mrs. Rain carried it without knowing, in a patch her son trusted her to protect." Mrs. Rain covered her mouth as tears spilled down her face. Mara looked out over the rows of soldiers, and Alice refused to eat after the funeral, not because he wanted to die. He refused because his last mission was not complete. He was waiting for someone to listen. The hall blurred. Mara stopped. For a moment, she could not breathe. Then Noah moved. He pushed his wheelchair forward beside the podium. His hands shook, but his voice, when it came, was clear. "I was 19 at Marja Ridge," he said. "I heard them say there were no survivors while I was still alive. I heard Sergeant Rain call back. I heard Nurse Ellison tell him to mark me because she was coming. If anyone calls that confusion again, they can come say it to my face." A sound passed through the hall. Not applause, not outrage. Something deeper. Recognition. Noah turned toward Mrs. Rain. "Ye said, I'm sorry it took this long for you to hear it without lies around it." Mrs. Rain rose. She walked to him and placed both hands around his face. "Me, Caleb, would have liked you," she whispered. Noah broke. Mara stepped back, but Atlas moved forward. He picked up Kayla's dog tag from the table gently between his teeth. A collective stillness took the room. The dog walked to Mrs. Rain first. He placed the tag in her palm. She clutched it and sobbed. Then Atlas did something no one had commanded. He turned, went back to the table, took the burnt cobalt patch, and carried it to Major Price. A murmur rose. Price accepted it both hands. Atlas then returned to Mara's side and sat. Mara looked down at him through tears. "What?" she whispered. Atlas looked toward the hallway. At first, Mara thought someone had entered. No, the hall doors were open, and beyond them, morning light fell across the corridor leading to Ward 7. Soldiers stood there too many to fit inside. Nurses, orderlies, cook handlers, men on crutches, women in uniforms. People who had come not for spectacle, but because silence had cracked and they wanted to witness what came through. Major Price understood before Maradia. She stepped back to the microphone. "By authority of Forrester Military Hospital Command, pending final review, Kuelis is removed from termination status immediately. He will remain under medical care and protective custody. Nurse Ellison will continue as his designated care liaison, unless she objects." Mara's hand went to Alice's head. "I don't object," she said. A fragile laugh moved through the room. Major Price continued. "Furthermore, this command will submit Sergeant Caleb Ronan, Colonel Thomas Arlen, and all verified Marja Rich survivors for corrected record review. Corrected record. Mrs. Rain looked at Mara. Will they change what's on Caleb's file? Major Price, face softened. We will fight until they do. Helen nodded, holding the tag against her heart. Atlas finally wagged his tail once, only once. But the whole front row saw it, and that was enough. Later, after statements were taken, and the hall emptied slowly, Mara found herself alone in the memorial corridor with Atlas. Sunlight touched the polished floor. The flags hung still. Somewhere down the hall, Noah was arguing with a nurse about whether testimony counted as physical therapy. Mara sat on a bench. Atlas climbed up beside her without permission, too large for the space, his shoulder pressed against hers. You know you're not a lapdog, she whispered. He sighed. For the first time in years, Mara let herself remember Kayla. Without seeing only the fire, she remembered him offering half a protein bar, laughing at for stealing socks, writing for a scar on a packet because he believed she would still be there when truth needed hands. Her grief did not vanish, her guilt did not magically lift, but something shifted. A locked door opened. Atlas rested his head on her bandaged hand. Mara looked toward the memorial hall where Kayla's name would one day be corrected. Maybe Arlen's too. Maybe Marja Rich would stop being a file built from lies and become what it had always been. A place where people stayed for one another when orders told them not to. Goodbye, Mara whispered. Atlas closed his eyes, and for the first time since the funeral, he slept. Some heroes leave behind medals. Some leave behind scars. Caleb left behind a dog who refused to let the truth be buried with him. Atlas could not speak, but he remembered the scent of a lie, the touch of a brave medic, and the promise of a final mission. If this story moved you, subscribe to Silent Valor. Go and tell us where you're watching from. Loyalty Life. This deserves to be remembered.